Please welcome Barry McCarthy with Platinum sponsor First Data.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Barry McCarthy, and glad to be here and glad to be a Platinum sponsor of this great event. And once again, want to remind everybody how fortunate we are to have an organization like TAG in our community. First Data operates in over 30 countries around the world, and TAG is truly a unique organization, and this makes Atlanta a really unique community, of which we're really proud. Today's conversation is about innovation adventures, the leadership culture needed to take advantage of changing capabilities and understanding how new types of competition are challenging every one of us and every industry. Today we welcome Vice Admiral Ted Twig Branch as he takes us on his adventure. He's a native of Long Beach, Mississippi, graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy, and earned a master's degree in international relations from the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. As a naval aviator, he's had operational command at the squadron, ship, aircraft carrier, and strike group levels. He's flown A-7s and FA-18s in combat, completed Navy nuclear power training, and commanded the USS Nimitz on an Arabian Gulf combat cruise. As Carl Vinson Strike Group Commander, he led initial Navy Marine Corps relief efforts following the Haiti earthquake. His previous assignment was a commander, Naval Air Force Atlantic Fleet. Admiral Branch was appointed to the rank of Vice Admiral in July of 2013 upon assumption of his current duties as Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Information Warfare, known as N2N6, and as the 65th Director of Naval Intelligence. The N2N6 portfolio encompasses the information warfare domain with programs in communications, networks, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, oceanography, meteorology, electronic warfare, cyber and space systems. And if that is not enough, he also serves as the Navy's Chief Information Officer, as the Director of Navy Cybersecurity, and as leader of the information warfare community. Please welcome me in joining me in welcoming Admiral Branch.
Okay, well, good morning. I don't know if this will follow, I guess it will follow me around. I'm going to try to not stay tethered to the podium here as we go forward. It's a pleasure to be back in Atlanta. I was here last summer speaking to the business executives for national security and another TAG event, and I'm happy to get a return engagement. A great introduction. You might wonder what everybody else in the Navy does after that line of stuff, but like any great organization, many represented here, it is a great team. And I'm particularly proud to come down and talk about the Navy and information warfare in the Navy and how we're moving the ball in that space. I have to say, as I came on stage, we are getting this adherence to schedule. There was an effort to stretch a little bit before me, and I'm told, well, you can stretch a little if you want. When I got down here yesterday, I looked at the granular schedule that's given to the speakers, and it's not the one that's in your program. That's a fairly top-level schedule, but in the granular schedule, I mean, it's by minute. It's minute to minute to minute on what's supposed to be going on. I guess Crystal gets the credit for that. But it was a little daunting to me, and so I decided that I would get up here and look for the trap door in the stage or the ejector mechanism or whatever it was that got people off on time. Anyway, we'll talk about this and see if we can get through and get you back on schedule. The mission of your Navy, the mission of our Navy, is to be ready to conduct prompt and sustained combat incident operations at sea. We will protect the United States and will preserve America's strategic influence in key regions of the world. Naval forces in operations from the seafloor to space, from deep water to the littorals, and in the information domain will deter aggression and enable peaceful crisis resolution on terms favorable to the United States and our friends and allies around the world. And when that deterrence fails, we'll be ready to conduct combat operations to defeat any enemy. That's a fairly muscular mission statement, and it's fitting. You buy a Navy to go out and defend your country. And in our Navy today, with our new CNO, John Richardson, it's all about warfighting. We are in the business of doing warfighting, and that's what we're about. In the information warfare community, we're finding that over the course of the last several years, information has elevated to its own warfighting domain. And we think of it these days in terms of that domain that's analogous to undersea warfare or surface warfare or aviation warfare. Information warfare has that prominence in the way we think about things. And importantly, we're coming to find and believe that if we don't get it right in the information domain, the things that we do in the others really don't particularly matter, because the battle will likely be lost before it's ever joined if we don't get it right in this space. So what do we do about that? How do we position the Navy? How do we go forward with that in mind? This is our plan. This is the campaign design for maritime superiority in this environment. And in putting together this plan, we, as any good organization does, assessed the environment, assessed the strategic picture. And what we found was a set of three interrelated global forces that influence our decisions and our actions. The first of those is the traffic, the traditional maritime domains, the ocean, seas, waterways, including the sea floor, and the traffic, the increasing activity in those global commons. The proliferation of technology, the opening of the Arctic to more shipping and more trade, the advancements in technology that allow us to mine and extract resources from the sea or from the sea floor. And lately in the news a lot, the mass migrations across the waterways, including illicit trafficking in people and material. The second force is the technological, the information space, the traffic in the information world. Discussed already this morning here, and the interrelated connectivity that gives us. It's a very global environment, and that explosion of advancement in information technology, the connectivity of the world, shapes the way we do business. It allows for speed of decision. It allows for a lower cost of entry. Nowadays, a single actor with a keyboard can have strategic effects. The third force that's shaping us is the rapid advancement of technology generally. And information is one of those technologies, and Moore's law certainly has proved itself to be true, maybe even undershot the mark in the rate of advancement. But across the board, all the technology development that we're seeing and the changes that brings to the way we have to think about doing business, the adaptive manufacturing, the biological engineering, the big data analytics, and how we handle the crush of data without Watson in the Navy. We can't afford Watson. Yeah, he's telling me we can make a deal. So all that together shapes our decision space. A fourth force that's out there is our budget. And you may not in Atlanta follow closely the defense expenditure, but I'll tell you it's been pretty flat over the last few years, and absent some crisis or significant happening around the world, we expect it to remain flat. So we have to deal with the resources that we have and make changes within that boundary. So we look at that as kind of the standing forces and constraints around the world. And then we look at the strategic environment, the way militaries typically would be thought of to look at them in terms of who else is out there and what are they doing. This slide represents What's typically known around DC as the 4+1, 4 countries and 1 non-state actor that are impacting the strategic environment. The 2 on the top are China and Russia. They're the tier 1 competitors, if you will, peer or near peer competitors. And they can represent an existential threat to the country. They have nuclear weapons, they have nuclear delivery systems. And so we obviously have to keep those very much in mind and factor them into what we are doing. If you read the paper, you know also that these 2 actors have been pretty adventurous, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years. And they're starting to flex their muscles again in one case and for the first time in the other. The second tier, represented by Iran and North Korea, are less capable from a military standpoint, and we don't think they would change our way of life in terms of an existential threat to the country. But they are also less predictable. And again, if you look at the papers and see how these play out, you'll see some fairly interesting actions that they've done over the course of the last couple of years in particular. And so they stay high on our radar. At the bottom is the flag for ISIL, representing the Islamic terrorist situation out around the world. It's a global threat. It's a clash of culture. And they are sophisticated. They use social media and this connected information environment to command and control activities around the world. And importantly, to keep in mind, it's a long-term situation. This is not an issue or a problem that's going to be solved here in the short term. So back to the campaign design. With all that in mind, what do we need to do to be able to move the Navy forward and work in this space? We start with people, and we start with the core attributes of the people in our force. Those are integrity, accountability, initiative, and toughness. And it's really about, for our military, for our Navy, and just like you need to have, I suspect, in business, we want to have people that can be trusted to be predictable and act in accordance with our professional norms and standards and execute commander's intent, even if they can't call back and check and get updates and get redirection. So for integrity, it's about understanding what our core values, our norms, the way we do business in our profession and as a country, and making sure that when we send a commander over the horizon on the other side of the planet, we can depend on her and her crew to comport with the way we want them to do business, even if they can't call home. In a comms denied or comms degraded environment, which we expect to face in a warfighting scenario, that's essential. For accountability, it's not just the leaders being accountable to higher headquarters, but it's the leaders holding themselves and their crews accountable for mission accomplishment. It's having a goal in mind with having milestones along the way, metrics that you can measure, and then being accountable to take action to correct when those metrics are not being met. For initiative, we want people to exercise the full extent of their authority. Again, in that scenario with a comms denied or comms degraded environment where you can't call home and check with headquarters, we need to ensure that the people on the scene understand what they are allowed to do and have them execute ruthlessly to the extent of the authority that they have. And finally, toughness. In any line of work, in any profession, toughness is about resiliency. It's about the ability to adapt to harsh situations. It's about being able to get up off the mat and fight again, fight another day, or continue the battle. That's about our people, that's about our platforms, and importantly these days, that's about our networks, our whole mechanical and electrical systems, and our weapon systems. With those attributes, we also have 4 lines of effort. The first of those lines of effort is to strengthen naval warfighting at and from the sea. We'll do that in conjunction with our partners, the Marines. We'll do it with a focus on blue water, open ocean operations. We'll do it in a connected, information contested, and congested environment. We will further ingrain information warfare in everything we do, and we'll operationalize what we call electromagnetic spectrum warfare, or electromagnetic spectrum maneuver warfare. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then at the top of that list, we have to take care of the strategic deterrent. So the Navy, as you know, with our undersea leg of the nuclear triad, sees that as our job one. That's the number one thing that we do. And in the information world, assuring that communication to those forces is the number one thing we do. The second line of operation is being a rapid learning organization, and not just for individual sailors and changing the way we do training and learning for the sailors, but being a rapid learning organization across the board. Our CNO is a big thinker. He wants to, with a business kind of model, have a plan, have a hypothesis, have metrics, execute the plan, measure, and make corrections. He wants us to fail, but he wants us to fail small and recorrect and keep on an upward trajectory as we move forward. So that's a culture change for the Navy. It's a culture change for government in general, but we're moving out on that with that new direction and that new energy of innovation and trying new things in a quick learning environment. We want to take care of our people and learn how we can compete with you, frankly, to attract and recruit and retain the kind of workforce we need for information warfare and to be dominant in warfare in the information age. And it's a tough sell in some regards for the Navy because we have some obvious constraints. We can't compete with you for salary. You know, oftentimes we can't compete with you for the accoutrements of what is expected in a information heavy workplace today. I was talking to the CIO for Intel, the company, the other day, and I asked her this question: how do you do it? And she said, well, we're a very friendly company, and we take great care of our employees. We give them food. We have nap pods. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, a nap pod probably won't work for me, but there are some things we can do, and we do, and we have some advantages. One advantage is it's service to country, and we find that the millennials are very interested in service to their country. They're very interested, as most of our force is, in being a part of something larger than themselves. That's an attraction for us. It is an adventure. You do get to travel. You get to meet interesting people, sometimes hurt them. There are also things you can do for us that you can't do anywhere else, at least not without going to jail. So we do have some attractiveness in our space, and we're competing for that workforce with you. The third line of operation is partnering. And how do we partner, and not just the classic sense of partnering with the Army and the Air Force or with our joint, our friends and allies around the world, but increasing our partnerships with industry and academia and the labs and business to help us learn from you. The government used to be a major driver of the technology sector. Not so much anymore. When you look at the overall marketplace, the government no longer really has the driver's seat in that, except in a few niche areas. So it's important that we learn from industry, we learn from academia, we partner and realize those things that work out in this place. And then more and more, how do we roll those technologies and those things into the way we do business? Okay, so that brings us to our focus area in my world, and that's information warfare and what we're doing in that space. I mentioned electromagnetic warfare, or electromagnetic maneuver warfare. That's a concept that operationalizes warfare in the information domain. And we talk about the spectrum, and I'm not talking about the radio frequency spectrum. I'm talking about the whole shebang, from direct current to gamma and how we operate our force in that spectrum. It's not a new concept, but some of the ways that we're doing business in there is new. The idea is that you're able to understand that environment, that spectrum, sense your signature, your force signature, and what you put out into that spectrum, sense the enemy's signature there, and then maneuver within the spectrum to advantage your own force and disadvantage an enemy. There are many examples of that. Earlier, I mean, if you think about it, a smoke screen in World War II was an example of electromagnetic maneuver warfare. We understood the visible spectrum enough to know that if we put smoke out there, the enemy couldn't see through that smoke screen, and we could maneuver then behind that smoke screen in the spectrum. For EMW, it's more about electronics and things more technical. So we'll use adaptive waveforms and programmable radios and data links and planar arrays to allow us to appear in places that we're not expected to appear or do not appear at all. So there's a lot of work in that space, in that effort. Manned and unmanned, we're moving increasingly into an unmanned environment. And all the things that were talked about this morning in terms of big data analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence. I thought the robot video was terrific. I'd like to steal that. All the things that we're learning and how those all knit together are going to impact the way we do business in warfighting. And it's largely driven by information. The ability to network our sensors, having small sensor networks that are all knitted together, networked weapon systems, having kinetic effects driven by non-kinetic means. We have a program in the Navy with our command and control aircraft, the E-2 Advanced Hawkeye, that's able now, with the use of high-speed data links and the information technology with those waveforms, to give targeting quality data to weapons launched from platforms that never see the target. So, for example, we can have an F-18 out there in a carrier strike group and have a threat engaged by the E-2 from that F-18 that's way beyond the radar range of that platform, but not beyond the range of the missile. That works. It works today. It's been deployed. We haven't quite figured out, there are 3 guys in the back of that E-2. We haven't quite figured out who gets the credit for the kill, whether it's the guy in the back or, anyway. But all kinds of work in that space. We have swarming UAVs. We have swarming boats. We have, a lot of innovation from a warfighting perspective that relies on the data and how we handle the data. And that brings us to the last point here, and it's the bright, shiny object that everybody talks about, and that's how do we secure this effort? How do we secure this network, all these systems, whether it's the networks or the whole mechanical and electrical systems, the steering gear on the ship, the navigation gear on the ship, or the weapon system. All that is under threat from a cyber actor. For our network piece, we were pretty sanguine about how we did enterprise networking. We've been in the business of big networks since 1999 with the Navy and Marine Corps Internet. It's about 700,000 users. It's a big machine. But that network was built not with cybersecurity in mind so much, but with efficiency and lowering cost in mind. So through the years, we've had to bolt on cybersecurity to the degree that we could in that existing network. In 2013, in the fall, we had an incursion in that network from a state actor that became known by us as Operation Rolling Tide, and it was a real wake-up call, a real shock to the system that this state actor could be in our network and maneuver within our network and potentially do damage to us. So that, as you might expect, caused a bevy of activity. There's all kinds of effort going on to mitigate that threat and eradicate and protect the network, but it was unfocused. It was all over the map. So organizationally, what we did was we stood up a cybersecurity organization, a task force, to try to focus all those efforts from around the Navy and move forward in one direction. We came up with an initial effort to protect the boundary of the network and clean up, mitigate that threat. And we went after that largely with commercial technology, upgrading our boundary defenses and hardening the outer shell. But we realized along the way, one, that we couldn't whack every mole. We couldn't do every vulnerability in the network that way. We couldn't afford it. And also, that didn't do anything for us within the network if an actor got past that boundary defense. So we went into a defense in depth concept, I'm sure much like industry practice, the protect, detect, react, restore model, where we have sensors within the network to detect activity, not relying solely on that boundary layer defense, and then an ability with control points to segment the network and react to small pieces, sandbox or put a thread off into one corner and operate the rest of the network, be resilient, and then clean that incursion up when we could get to it. That's well in work, and we're making great progress in those areas with new technology, with R&D, in conjunction with our partners to make that network more robust, and all the networks, not just the transport layer. So a lot of work down that path. The only other thing I'll mention about that is our cyber-safe model, and we have a not a very elaborate slide for this audience, but it works. A cyber-safe model where we have a core subset of uber-hardened components, if you will. There are some systems that are so essential. Nuclear command and control comes to mind, that we can't accept what we would say is a normal level of risk in that space. And so for cyber-safe, we would have components that have a trusted supply chain, well, a trusted foundry, perhaps, trusted supply chain, special work controls to work on those components, special accreditations for the people that work in that space. And we would do this for the areas that we deem needing that extra level of cybersecurity. There are three levels, A, B, and C, with the A being the most. Obviously, that's a very expensive proposition, and we can't do that for everything. But we are well down the path deciding what it is we need to do in that space. I guess I should mention, I didn't at the beginning, but I should mention that the people that are doing all this, in my introduction, it was discussed all the different things in our portfolio. About 5 years ago, we brought all those specialties together and brought them into the information warfare community. To be, we looked down the road and we saw that this was coming of age, this importance, this preeminence of information warfare. My good friend Bob Wright over there in the room, retired Admiral, was a key proponent of that change in our organization and our culture to come together and put these information warriors in place and lead the Navy in this area as we go into the information age. And we've gotten traction, and we're pretty successful as we've gone down that path. The other thing about cyber-safe I'll mention, and the other thing about cybersecurity, is it requires a cultural change in our organization and for our people. It's not just the IT guys anymore that are involved and dependent on this, and the recognition of that is new and different for us. Heretofore, the CEO of a ship, if something went wrong with some of their systems or networks, they would call the techie in and say, "This is wrong with my network, go out and fix it and tell me when you're done." And that's about the way it went. And nowadays, that's not acceptable. So the CEOs at every level, the leaders at every level, are accountable for the things that they can control. So they have to have a greater understanding and activity in this space. And finally, the cultural change with the crew, with every sailor, knowing that if they touch a system or a keyboard, they can be an asset or a threat. And that it's an all-hands responsibility to have good cyber hygiene and a good awareness of the effects that you have in this cyber area. Something as simple as plugging their iPhone into the computer to charge it is obviously not a good thing to do from a cybersecurity standpoint, because you get malware that way. Phishing attacks hit the Navy just like they hit everybody else. So that kind of education and training and all hands responsibility for cybersecurity is very important for us as we go. My last slide, I think, is about partnering and partnering with industry in particular. We've done a pretty good job over the last year out at West in San Diego in February. Sea Air Space is coming up in May in DC at National Harbor. And we have our own N2 and 6 Industry Day in June. And we're soliciting your good ideas and what we can do together to advance the ball in this space. Oftentimes, we're viewed as being hard to deal with in the government, and we are. And there's a lot of effort involved right now trying to help that situation along, trying to revise some of the acquisition rules, trying to allow for more rapid innovation, try to give me more flexibility to give R&D money to people with good ideas. So there's movement in that space. I invite you to come and talk to us. And in fact, if you see another guy dressed like me, he's around here somewhere. He has a whole stack of cards that has a point of contact for talking to the Navy. So I would expect a pile on him, sometime between now and lunch. Anyway, this is our way ahead for the Navy. It's a way ahead in the information age of warfare. It's a way ahead that relies on our association with our partners that think, and our partners that build, and our partners that innovate. So I invite your help. It's been a pleasure to come down and see you in Georgia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have this for you right here.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thanks a
Appreciate
lot.
it.